Welcome to Silent Queen's Reckoning. I'm so glad you could join us today. Now let's dive right into the story.
My husband texted working late, but I saw him enter a hotel with his mistress. Chapter 1. At 8:17 on a rainy Friday night, Elise Morgan's husband texted that he was working late. At 8:21, she watched him step out of a black car in front of the most expensive hotel in the city with his hand on another woman's waist. The message was still glowing on her phone. Longboard call. Do not wait up. Across the street, beneath the bronze canopy of the Valmont Hotel, Adrian Morgan leaned close to a woman in a scarlet coat and smiled in a way Elise had not seen at home for years. The woman laughed, tilted her face toward him, and let him brush rain from her hair with his bare hand. Elise stood under the awning of a closed florist, holding a paper bag of lemon pastries she had bought for him because he said he had not eaten all day. For a moment, the whole city seemed to narrow into three things: the wet shine of the pavement, the white hotel lights on Adrian's wedding ring, and the red coat moving beside him like a warning flag. The woman was not a stranger. Her name was Celeste Vane. She was Adrian's public relations director, 29 years old, polished enough to look effortless and ambitious enough to never stand where there was no camera. Elise had met her twice. Both times, Celeste had called Adrian brilliant in a tone that made the words sound private. Adrian guided Celeste through the revolving doors. He did not look back. Elise did not run after him. She did not shout his name. She did not cross the street and throw the pastries at his chest, although for one clean second she understood why people did dramatic things in movies. Instead, she stood still. Rain tapped the awning above her. Her hair clung to her cheek. The paper bag softened in her hand. Then her phone rang. Adrian. Elise looked through the glass entrance of the hotel. She could see him now in the lobby, standing beside Celeste near the reception desk. He lifted the phone to his ear, while Celeste adjusted the lapel of his coat. Elise answered. Are you home? Adrian asked. His voice was calm, tired, perfectly rehearsed. It was the voice he used with investors when numbers were worse than he wanted to admit. Elise looked at him across the street. Not yet. Do not wait for me. This call may go past midnight. Celeste slid a key card from the receptionist's hand. Adrian accepted it from her with a small smile. Elise felt something inside her go quiet. Must be an important call, she said. It is. The Valmont expansion deal is delicate. I need everyone to stay focused. The irony was so precise it almost made her dizzy. The Valmont expansion deal. Adrian had spent 6 months trying to secure a hospitality partnership for his luxury wellness company, Morgan Well. If the deal went through, he would gain access to 3 flagship hotels, a private spa network, and the kind of prestige that could rescue his company from the quiet debt he thought Elise did not understand. What he did not know was that the Valmont Hotel was no longer controlled by the board he had been flattering. 3 weeks earlier, Elise's late father had transferred his majority voting interest in Valmont Hospitality into her name through the family trust. She had not told Adrian yet. She had planned to tell him tonight. She had even bought pastries first, because some foolish part of her still believed good news should be delivered with sweetness. Elise, Adrian said. Are you listening? She watched him place his hand on Celeste's lower back as they walked toward the private elevator bank. Yes, Elise said. I heard everything. Good. Get some rest. You too. He ended the call. The private elevator doors opened. Celeste stepped inside first. Adrian followed. Elise raised her phone and took one clear photo before the doors closed. Then she walked into the rain. Chapter 2. The Valmont Hotel had belonged to Elise's family longer than Adrian had known her. Not in the obvious way. There was no Morgan family plaque in the lobby, and no portrait of her father hanging near the elevators. The Valmont was held through separate companies, old trusts, and a management agreement that allowed the public board to look more powerful than it was. Elise's father, Harrison Vale, had believed true ownership should not need to introduce itself. Elise used to resent that secrecy. As a child, she watched her father enter rooms through side doors while louder men took credit for decisions he had already made. When she asked why he did not correct them, he told her that applause was expensive. It cost attention, privacy, and sometimes judgment. He preferred control. Elise had not understood then. She understood more as she watched Adrian lie from inside her own hotel. Her father had died in early spring after a long illness. Adrian attended the funeral, said the right words, and left before the reception ended because a product launch required his presence. For 2 months after that, Elise moved through grief like a person walking underwater. Adrian called her distant. He said she had lost her spark. He said their marriage could not revolve around her father's shadow. He never asked what had been left to her. That had been his first mistake. The second was assuming her quietness meant she did not read documents. Elise had spent the last 3 weeks with her father's attorney, Margaret Sloane, learning the structure of the trust. Valmont Hospitality was the largest asset, but not the only one. There were commercial properties, investment accounts, and a private line of credit that Adrian's company had unknowingly been negotiating to access through the hotel partnership. Margaret had explained the situation with the patience of a woman who had seen many charming husbands underestimate many quiet wives. Morgan Well's expansion proposal needed approval from Valmont's controlling interest before any final signing. Adrian believed he was courting the hotel board. In truth, the board could recommend, but Elise could approve or reject. Tonight, Adrian thought he was entering the Valmont as a powerful suitor. He was entering as a tenant in a building his wife could close to him with one phone call. Elise did not make that call yet. She crossed the street after the elevator doors closed and entered the lobby through the main doors. Warm air wrapped around her, carrying the scent of polished wood, white lilies, and expensive perfume. The marble floor reflected the chandelier light. Guests in dark coats moved toward the bar. A pianist played near the lounge, soft enough that no one had to listen unless they wanted to. The receptionist looked up with practiced brightness. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to the Valmont." Elise wiped rain from her phone's screen. "Good evening. Is Mr. Julian Hart on duty?" The receptionist's smile changed. She had not expected that name from a woman with wet hair and a pastry bag. "May I ask who is calling?" "Elise Vale Morgan." The receptionist froze for half a second. Then she stood straighter. "One moment, Ms. Morgan. Not Mrs. Adrian Morgan. Ms. Morgan." The title landed gently, but Elise felt it. Within 2 minutes, Julian Hart appeared from the executive corridor. He was the Valmont's general manager, a tall man in his 50s with silver-rimmed glasses and a face that rarely gave anything away. He had worked for her father for 20 years. When he saw Elise, concern moved through his expression. "Ms. Morgan." She held up the phone, showing only enough of the photo for him to understand. Julian did not ask unnecessary questions. "My office," he said. They walked through a side corridor lined with framed black and white photographs of the hotel through different decades. Elise remembered visiting this hallway as a girl, touching the frames while her father spoke with managers. Back then, she thought the hotel was an elegant maze. Tonight, it felt like a witness. Julian's office overlooked the service courtyard. It was quiet, practical, and far from the glitter of the lobby. Elise set the pastry bag on the desk. Only then did she realize her fingers were trembling. Julian noticed but did not comment. "Which room?" she asked. He checked the system. His mouth tightened. "Presidential Residence, East Tower. Registered under a corporate hospitality hold connected to Morgan Well." Elise closed her eyes briefly. The presidential residence. Adrian had once told her that room was reserved for heads of state, visiting founders, and people who paid enough to avoid being named. Elise remembered laughing and saying she would like to see it someday. He had kissed her forehead and said maybe, when his company was bigger. Tonight he had taken Celeste there. With a corporate hold connected to the company, he claimed was working late. "Who authorized the hold?" Elise asked. Julian turned the screen slightly. The request came through Mr. Morgan's office. It was approved by interim partnership access, pending the expansion talks. That access can be revoked. Elise looked at the screen. There was Adrian's name. Celeste's name appeared as an authorized guest. Below that, a note requested privacy from front desk calls. No housekeeping until morning and champagne on arrival. Champagne. The word was small and obscene. Elise did not cry. Her sadness had gone somewhere deep, where it could not slow her hands. "Preserve all records," she said. "Check-in video, elevator logs, keycard access, corporate hold request, room service order, and billing trail. Do not alert them." Julian nodded. "Of course. And Margaret Sloane? She is on the board call tonight. Call her." Julian reached for the phone. Elise looked at the pastry bag on the desk. The rain had made the paper thin. A dark spot of lemon filling had seeped through one corner. She almost laughed. She had come to feed a husband who was already drinking champagne with his mistress in her hotel. When Margaret answered, Julian put the call on speaker. "Elise," Margaret said. Elise's voice was very calm. "Adrian is upstairs in the presidential residence with Celeste Vane. He told me he was working late on the Valmont expansion deal. The room is under a Morgan Well corporate hold." There was a short silence. Then Margaret said, "Do not confront him alone." "I won't." "Good. Tonight is not only marital misconduct. If he used partnership access and company resources for a private affair while negotiating with an entity you control, we may have governance, billing, and disclosure issues." Elise looked toward the ceiling, as if she could see through the floors to the room above. "I want everything documented. Then we proceed carefully," Margaret said. "Evidence first. Consequences second." Elise touched the edge of her father's old signet ring on her right hand. She had worn it since the funeral. Adrian called it too masculine. Tonight it felt exactly right. "No," she said. "Evidence first. Consequences in public." Chapter 3. Adrian Morgan had built his life on rooms believing him. He was handsome in a controlled way, with dark hair, sharp suits, and a voice that made weak projections sound like strategy. At 41, he had the trained ease of a man who expected people to lean in when he spoke. Investors liked him because he could turn risk into language. Reporters liked him because he looked good in profile. Employees feared disappointing him because he made disappointment feel like moral failure. Elise had loved him before she understood the machinery. When they met, Morganwell was still a small wellness analytics company renting half a floor above a dental clinic. Adrian worked late because there was real work to do. He came home with printer ink on his cuffs and excitement in his eyes. He talked about making luxury health services more data-driven, more personal, less wasteful. Elise admired the ambition. She also admired the tenderness he showed when he thought no one important was watching. For a while, that tenderness was real. Then success taught him to perform it. The company grew. The office moved downtown. Adrian learned to speak in panels, pose beside investors, and accept praise without seeming hungry for it. He also learned that Elise's calm made him look grounded. She remembered birthdays, sent gifts to bored spouses, caught errors in pitch decks, and sat through dinners where men explained industries she had studied in silence. Adrian called her his steady center when cameras were near. At home, he called her overly sensitive when she noticed his lies. Celeste appeared 2 years into Morganwell's second funding round. She was hired to manage public relations, then quickly managed access to Adrian's mood, calendar, and image. She knew when to flatter him in front of others and when to seem impressed in private. Elise saw the pattern before Adrian admitted there was any pattern to see. At first, there were harmless explanations. Celeste traveled because the press tour required it. Celeste called late because the West Coast editors were difficult. Celeste touched his arm because she was expressive. Celeste knew which tie he should wear because branding mattered. Elise listened. She watched. She waited for Adrian to respect her enough to stop insulting both of them with bad lies. He never did. By the time Elise's father became seriously ill, Adrian's absence had hardened into habit. He sent flowers to the hospital through his assistant. He asked how Harrison was doing while checking emails. When Elise came home after long hospice evenings, Adrian complained that she seemed emotionally unavailable. That accusation had exhausted her more than grief. Still, she did not want a war. Even after the inheritance transfer, Elise had not planned to crush him. She had planned to separate personal pain from business judgment. If Morganwell's proposal was strong, she would review it fairly. If the partnership helped the hotels and their guests, she would approve it with safeguards. She was angry with Adrian as a wife, but she did not want employees or clients punished for his failures. That had been her position at 8:16. At 8:21, watching him enter her hotel with Celeste under a company hold, the situation changed. Not because of jealousy alone. Jealousy was too small a word for what he had done. He had used business access for a private betrayal. He had lied about working on a deal while exploiting the hospitality privileges connected to that deal. He had placed his mistress inside the negotiation space and left a record that could compromise Morganwell, the Valmont, and anyone foolish enough to sign without review. He had assumed the room would keep his secret because he believed the room belonged to him. That assumption made him dangerous. In Julian's office, Elise changed from a wife in shock to a controlling stakeholder with work to do. Margaret Sloan arrived at the hotel 40 minutes later in a black raincoat, carrying a leather folder and the expression of a person who had already anticipated 6 legal problems. She was 60, compact and unsentimental. Her gray hair was cut to her jaw. Her eyes missed very little. She found Elise standing beside Julian's desk, reading the corporate hold request. "You are sure you want to act tonight?" Margaret asked. Elise looked up. "No, I am sure I have to." Margaret placed the folder on the desk. Then we keep the steps clean. First, revoke discretionary partnership privileges. Second, preserve records. Third, notify the board chair that no expansion signing may proceed without a conflict review. Fourth, decide whether to allow Mr. Morgan to attend tomorrow's investor breakfast. Elise's face tightened. Tomorrow's investor breakfast. Adrian had talked about it for weeks. Morganwell was hosting a private breakfast in the Valmont's conservatory for investors, hotel board members, and wellness industry guests. Adrian planned to present the expansion as nearly secured. He had told Elise's spouses were not needed because the meeting would be technical. Now she understood. Celeste would be there. Elise would not have been. "Is my name on the breakfast program?" she asked. Julian checked. "No." Margaret's mouth flattened. "Convenient." Elise looked at the guest list. Adrian Morgan, founder and CEO. Celeste Vane, Chief Communications Officer. Board representatives. Investors. Valmont Interim Committee. No Elise. Her father had once said exclusion was often the first draft of theft. "Add my name," Elise said. Julian looked at Margaret. Margaret nodded. As controlling trustee. Elise kept her eyes on the list. No public announcement tonight. Let him think the morning is his. Julian asked whether security should remove Adrian from the room. Elise considered it. The image was tempting. Adrian escorted through the lobby in last night's shirt, Celeste hiding behind sunglasses, staff watching with professional silence. It would be satisfying. It would also make him a victim too early. Adrian was best exposed when he believed he still controlled the stage. "No," Elise said. "Let them stay." Margaret studied her. "That will hurt. It already hurts." "Then why wait?" Elise looked toward the hotel tower. "Because tomorrow he is going to stand in front of investors and claim he built access to the Valmont. I want the room to know exactly whose access he abused." Margaret gave the smallest nod. "Your father would have approved the patience." Elise swallowed the ache that rose at that. She did not feel patient. She felt like a woman holding a blade by the wrong end and refusing to bleed where anyone could see. Chapter 4. Adrian came downstairs at 6:42 the next morning. Elise watched from the security office, seated beside Julian and Margaret, while the elevator camera showed him stepping into the corridor outside the presidential residence. He wore the same shirt from the night before, open at the collar beneath a fresh suit jacket delivered by the concierge at his request. Celeste followed 3 minutes later in a cream dress and oversized sunglasses, her red coat folded over one arm. They did not leave together. That almost made Elise laugh. After a night in a room tied to his company account, Adrian still believed separation in the hallway counted as discretion. The security monitors showed his route from the East Tower to the executive lounge, then to the conservatory. Celeste took the service elevator to the lower level and appeared near the event entrance 5 minutes later, suddenly professional, suddenly bright, suddenly carrying a tablet as if she had been working since dawn. Elise looked away from the screen. She had slept for 90 minutes in a guest office under a wool blanket Julian found in housekeeping. At 3 in the morning, she had nearly gone home. At 4, she almost called Adrian just to hear him lie again. At 5, she washed her face in the executive restroom, pinned her hair low, and put on the black suit Margaret's assistant brought from a 24-hour stylist service. Now she looked like her father on a difficult day. That steadied her. The investor breakfast began at 7:30 in the conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with citrus trees, white tablecloths, and expensive restraint. Rain washed the roof in silver sheets. The city beyond looked clean and distant. Adrian stood near the front, greeting guests with both hands and a warm laugh. His face showed no sign of guilt. That, more than the affair itself, made something in Elise harden. Guilt could be hidden. Absence of guilt could not. Celeste moved through the room with a headset microphone and a stack of programs. She touched Adrian's elbow twice, lightly, each time pretending to direct event flow. To the investors, she looked efficient. To Elise, she looked like a woman still wearing the confidence of last night's key card. Elise waited in a private corridor until the first round of coffee had been served. Inside the room, Adrian began his presentation. He spoke of synergy, discretion, elite wellness, and the future of hotel-based diagnostics. He described Morganwell's proposed partnership with the Valmont as a model for national expansion. He thanked the Valmont Interim Committee for its trust. He thanked Celeste for her tireless work. He did not mention his wife. He did not mention the woman who owned the voting control required for the deal. Then he made the sentence Margaret had predicted he would make. "We are aligned with Valmont leadership and prepared to move into final approval. Margaret looked at Elise. Elise opened the door. The conservatory quieted by degrees. First one guest noticed her. Then another. Then Celeste saw her from the side of the room and went very still. Adrian, still facing the screen, did not notice until the attention shifted away from him. He turned with the smile of a man expecting a late investor. The smile died. Elise walked in slowly, not for drama, but because the room deserved time to understand that she was not lost. Julian followed a few steps behind. Margaret came after him with the leather folder. Adrian recovered first. "Elise," he said, folding surprise into charm. "I did not know you were coming." That was true. She stopped near the front table. Clearly. A few guests glanced at each other. Celeste moved forward with a tight smile. "Mrs. Morgan, this is a closed business breakfast. We can have someone show you to the lounge." Elise looked at her. Celeste's smile stayed in place, but the color in her cheeks changed. Adrian laughed softly, performing calm for the room. "My wife has had a difficult few months. Her father passed recently. Elise, this may not be the best time." There it was. The public reduction. Grief as incompetence. Wife as interruption. Husband as patient manager of female emotion. The room accepted the frame for half a second. Only half. Julian stepped forward. "Ms. Vale Morgan is expected," he said. "Her seat is at the principal table." Adrian's eyes cut to him. "Julian, this is not necessary." "It is," Julian replied. Celeste's grip tightened around her tablet. Elise saw the investors begin to recalculate. Principal table. Expected. Julian's tone. Margaret's folder. Something had entered the room that did not fit Adrian's version. Adrian walked toward Elise and lowered his voice. "What are you doing?" She looked at his collar. A tiny line of lipstick, poorly wiped away, remained near the edge. "Listening to your board call," she said. He froze. The words were quiet enough that only he heard them, but his face told the room they mattered. Elise moved past him and took the empty seat Julian had added at the front. The place card read Elise Vale Morgan, controlling trustee, Valmont Hospitality Trust. Celeste saw it. Adrian saw it. The investors saw both of them seeing it. No one spoke. For years, Adrian had placed Elise beside him as a wife when it helped his image, and outside the room when he wanted control. Today, the room had placed her at the center without asking him. Margaret set a folder in front of Elise. Adrian returned to the podium, but his rhythm was gone. He clicked to the next slide too quickly. His voice stayed smooth, yet his hand tightened around the remote. Celeste forgot to advance a program note. One investor whispered to another. A board member leaned back and folded his arms. Elise listened. She let Adrian continue. She let him speak for 9 more minutes about trust, discretion, premium service, and long-term alignment. Then she raised her hand. Adrian stopped mid-sentence. "Yes," he said. Elise looked at the room, not at him. "Before any final approval is discussed, I need clarification on Morganwell's use of Valmont partnership privileges." The room tightened. Adrian's smile became smaller. "Administrative details can be handled later. They affect governance." Margaret opened the folder. Celeste took one step back. Elise saw it. Adrian did too. The morning had found its first crack. Chapter 5. Elise did not mention the affair first. That would have let Adrian reduce everything to marriage drama. He would have softened his voice, invoked grief, and made the room uncomfortable enough to prefer his version. He knew how to turn a wife's pain into an obstacle to business. So Elise began with records. Margaret distributed a 1-page summary to the principal investors and the Valmont committee. It was simple. Date, time, corporate hold request, authorized guests, suite category, billing path, special privacy instructions, and pending partnership access. No adjectives. That made it worse. The room read in silence. Adrian placed the remote on the podium. "This appears to be an internal hotel matter." Elise looked at him. "It is a partnership integrity matter." He smiled with patient disbelief. "Elise, you are new to this structure. Hospitality holds are common during negotiations. For business use." "Correct. Was the presidential residence used for business last night?" The question did not need volume. It moved through the conservatory with surgical calm. Celeste's face went pale beneath her makeup. Adrian's eyes flicked toward her, then back to Elise. "We had late preparation for this morning." Elise nodded once. "Preparation with champagne, no housekeeping, no front desk calls, and 2 guests entering by private elevator after you told me you were on a board call." A sound moved through the room. Not loud, more like air leaving several lungs at once. Adrian's jaw tightened. "This is inappropriate," he said. "You are using a personal misunderstanding to disrupt a major business meeting." There was the move. Personal misunderstanding. Elise had expected it. "No," she said. "I am identifying a conflict before this room relies on a false statement of alignment." An investor named Nora Whitcomb set the summary down. She was known for funding companies only after tearing apart their governance. Adrian had courted her for months. "Mr. Morgan," Nora said, "did you use Valmont negotiation privileges to book the presidential residence last night?" Adrian turned toward her. Morganwell had authorized access. "That is not what I asked." His smile hardened. "The room was connected to preparation for this morning." Nora glanced at Celeste. "Was Ms. Vane present for that preparation?" Celeste opened her mouth, then closed it. Adrian answered for her. "Celeste manages communications. Her involvement was appropriate." Elise watched Celeste absorb the answer. Adrian had not protected her. He had converted her into a business function. That was the first time Celeste looked afraid. Margaret spoke next, her voice level. "For clarity, Valmont Hospitality Trust has revoked discretionary partnership privileges granted to Morganwell pending review. No final approval is available today." Adrian's face changed. For the first time, the business consequence landed fully. "You cannot revoke access during a live negotiation," he said. Margaret looked at him as if he had complained about gravity. "The controlling trustee can." Adrian turned to Elise. "Controlling trustee?" The room became still enough to hear rain on the glass roof. Elise did not answer immediately. She gave him time to understand that every flattering lunch, every carefully worded email to the interim committee, every confident remark about final approval had been missing the person with the vote. She was not enjoying his shock, but she did recognize its cost. "My father transferred his majority interest before he died," she said. "I control the trust that controls Valmont Hospitality." Adrian looked as though someone had removed a floor beneath him. Celeste gripped the back of a chair. Elise continued, "I intended to tell you last night." Several faces turned toward Adrian. He knew what they were hearing. He had texted working late. He had entered the hotel with Celeste. He had slept in the presidential residence under partnership access. While his wife was prepared to tell him she controlled the deal he needed, he had been upstairs with his mistress. No accusation could have arranged him more neatly than the timeline. Adrian tried to recover. "Elise, I understand how this looks. Do you?" The question was soft. He did not answer. Celeste suddenly spoke. "I was told the room was approved for executive preparation." Adrian turned sharply. Celeste saw the warning in his face and faltered, but the room had heard enough. Nora Whitcomb asked for all Morganwell-related privileges to be suspended until independent review. Another investor requested disclosure of any personal use of company or partner resources. The Valmont committee chair asked Margaret whether signing authority had officially shifted. Margaret produced the certification. The meeting that Adrian planned as a victory became a governance review in front of the people whose confidence he needed most. Elise said little. That was more effective. Each document did the work. Each question pulled Adrian farther from charm and closer to fact. By the time Julian confirmed that elevator logs, key card access, and billing records had been preserved, Adrian's forehead shone under the conservatory lights. He reached for the one weapon he had left. "Elise is grieving," he said. "Everyone here should understand that. Her father died recently, and she is processing more than anyone should have to carry. I will not stand here and let my wife's pain be turned into a public spectacle." It was beautifully delivered. For 1 second, the room almost softened. Then Elise opened her phone and placed it on the table. The screen showed his text from last night. "Longboard call. Do not wait up." Beside it, the photo she had taken 4 minutes later showed Adrian entering the Valmont with his hand on Celeste's waist. Elise did not pass the phone around. She did not need to. The nearest people saw. Their expressions told the rest. "My grief did not book that room," she said. No one defended him after that. Chapter 6. Adrian left the conservatory without being escorted. That was Julian's suggestion. Removal would create a scene too early. Letting him walk out under his own power made the damage look voluntary and therefore worse. Adrian understood the distinction. He kept his chin raised, nodded once to the investors, and said Morganwell would cooperate fully with any review. The words were polished. His hand shook when he picked up his folder. Celeste did not follow immediately. She stood near the side table, tablet held against her chest, eyes moving from Adrian to Elise to the closed folder in Margaret's hands. The red coat was gone. The sunglasses were gone. Without the props, she looked like a woman who had woken in someone else's mistake and found her name on the receipt. Adrian paused at the door and looked back. It was not a tender look. It was a command. Celeste obeyed it, but not with the old confidence. She walked after him with small, fast steps. When the door closed, the room did not erupt. Serious money rarely panicked loudly. It adjusted, recalculated, and began asking for documentation. Nora Whitcomb requested an independent review before any continued investment conversation. The Valmont committee agreed to suspend final approval. Margaret proposed a formal conflict inquiry. Julian confirmed all internal access logs were preserved and locked from deletion. Elise listened and answered only when necessary. Her voice stayed calm, but under the table her fingers pressed into her palm hard enough to leave half-moon marks. The business part of the morning was clear. The personal part kept arriving late in flashes. Adrian's hand on Celeste's waist. The key card. The champagne note. His voice on the phone telling Elise not to wait up. The way he had used her grief as a shield in front of investors. Each memory came with a small aftershock. By 11, the conservatory had emptied. Julian stayed to supervise staff clearing the tables. Margaret closed her folder and looked at Elise with uncommon gentleness. "You should go home." Elise looked around the room. Which home? The question escaped before she could stop it. Margaret understood. The townhouse where Elise lived with Adrian was legally half hers, practically filled with his choices, and emotionally contaminated by years of being told she was imagining things. Her father's old house stood empty. A suite in the Valmont could be prepared in minutes. None of them felt like home. "For today," Margaret said, "go somewhere he cannot enter without permission." Elise chose her father's office on the top floor. It was not sentimental. Harrison Vale had not been a soft man. His office had dark shelves, a wide desk, and the faint smell of cedar. There were no family photographs on the desk, only a brass lamp and a tray for incoming documents. But inside the top drawer, Elise found a wrapped peppermint, a spare pair of reading glasses, and a note in his handwriting that said, "If Elise asks for the old hotel maps, give her the blue folder, not the public archive." She sat in his chair and covered her mouth with one hand. The grief came then. Not loud, not pretty. It came as a deep pressure behind her ribs, as if the body finally demanded space for every injury the morning had delayed. She cried for her father, who had prepared her inheritance more carefully than he had prepared her heart. She cried for the marriage she had tried to keep respectable long after it stopped being kind. She cried because part of her still wanted Adrian to walk in and be someone else. No one came in. That was a mercy. At noon, her phone filled with messages. Adrian called 9 times. Then he texted, "We need to talk privately. You humiliated me in front of investors. You do not understand what you have done. Celeste is not the issue. Do not let Margaret poison you." Elise read them once. Then she forwarded them to Margaret. Margaret replied, "Do not engage. All communication through counsel." Elise placed the phone face down. For 8 years, she had answered Adrian's moods as if they were whether she needed to survive. If he was stressed, she softened. If he was cold, she tried to warm the room. If he was angry, she examined herself first. It had taken a hotel lobby, a key card, and a room full of investors to show her the pattern in its true shape. Adrian had not merely betrayed her. He had trained her to manage the consequences of noticing. That afternoon, Elise authorized 3 actions. First, all Morganwell access to Valmont properties was suspended pending review. Second, the corporate hold charges for the presidential residence were flagged for audit and removed from any partner concession account. Third, Valmont's board would meet Monday with Elise present as controlling trustee. None of these actions mentioned adultery. They did not need to. The evidence was stronger when it was boring. Chapter 7. By Monday morning, Adrian had created a new version of the story. It arrived through a carefully worded email to Morganwell's board, several investors, and the Valmont Interim Committee. He described the incident as a misinterpreted after-hours strategy session complicated by family grief and unclear trust transition protocols. He praised Elise's emotional strength while implying she was unstable. He praised Celeste's professionalism while avoiding any explanation for the room, the privacy request, or the champagne. The email was a masterpiece of soft accusation. Elise read it in Margaret's conference room before the Valmont board meeting. She was not surprised. Adrian rarely denied a problem directly when he could surround it with fog. Margaret placed a printed copy beside the access logs. "He is trying to make this procedural." Elise nodded. Because procedural sounds cleaner than betrayal. And safer than misuse of partnership privileges. The board meeting began at 10 in the Valmont's private library. 7 board members sat around a long table. Some had known Elise since childhood. Others knew only that she had inherited control faster than expected and had already disrupted a lucrative expansion deal. That made the room cautious. Caution was acceptable. Condescension was not. The board chair, Malcolm Reed, opened with condolences for Harrison and a formal acknowledgement of Elise's trustee position. He was 70, polished, and used to being obeyed by people who mistook age for authority. He then suggested the Morganwell matter might be handled quietly to protect the hotel's reputation. Elise listened until he finished. Quietly for whose protection? She asked. Malcolm blinked. For the institution. The institution is protected by clean records. Of course, but public conflict can create unnecessary damage. So can private misconduct. The room settled. Elise did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her father had taught her that power did not become more real when it grew louder. Margaret presented the timeline. Adrian's text to Elise. His arrival with Celeste. The corporate hold. The privacy instructions. The executive breakfast. His claim of final alignment. The trust documents confirming Elise's authority. Each item was plain. Each item made the next harder to dismiss. Malcolm folded his hands. This is unfortunate, but we must separate personal marital issues from hotel strategy. Elise looked at him. I agree. He seemed relieved too quickly. Then she continued. That is why we are focusing on unauthorized use of partner access, inaccurate statements to investors, potential misuse of company resources, and conflict disclosure. My marriage explains how I discovered the problem. It does not define the problem. No one answered immediately. A younger board member named Priya Desai leaned forward. That distinction matters. Elise gave her a brief nod. The discussion changed after that. Not entirely. A few members still worried about scandal. One suggested giving Adrian a chance to correct the record privately. Another said Morganwell's platform had strong market potential and should not be discarded because of executive judgment issues. Elise agreed with the last point. That surprised them. If Morganwell has value, she said, the review will show what can be preserved. But no deal will move forward under false alignment, undisclosed conflicts, or executive pressure. If the company wants future consideration, it will need independent governance, clean billing, and a leadership plan that does not depend on Adrian's charm. Margaret almost smiled. By the end of the meeting, the board approved an independent review and suspended all expansion negotiations for 30 days. Julian would oversee preservation of hotel records. Margaret would coordinate with outside counsel. Elise would receive direct reporting as controlling trustee. Malcolm was not pleased. That was fine. Leadership did not require pleasing men who preferred problems buried under good manners. After the meeting, Priya Desai caught Elise in the corridor. Your father underestimated how ready you were, Priya said. Elise looked at her. Priya corrected herself. No, he probably knew. The rest of us underestimated it. The sentence stayed with Elise all afternoon. At home, or what used to be home, Adrian was waiting. Elise had gone to the townhouse with Margaret's investigator and a security escort to collect clothing, personal documents, and her father's ring box. She did not expect Adrian to be there. His car was gone, but he stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, looking like a man staged for a difficult but intimate conversation. The kitchen smelled of coffee. He had made her favorite roast. The gesture might have hurt more if it were less calculated. I wanted you to come home to something normal, he said. Elise looked at the mug waiting on the counter. Normal. The word had done so much work in their marriage. Normal meant ignoring late calls. Normal meant smiling beside him after cold car rides. Normal meant letting Celeste's name pass through dinner like a harmless breeze. Normal meant Elise doubting her own discomfort, so Adrian could keep his reflection clean. I am here for my things, she said. Adrian glanced at the security escort near the hallway. His face tightened. Is this necessary? Yes. You are treating me like a criminal. No, Elise said. I am treating myself like someone who needs witnesses. That landed. For a moment, he looked honestly wounded. Then the wound turned into anger. You have no idea how ugly this can get. Elise picked up the folder of personal documents from the counter. I am beginning to. Chapter 8. The townhouse had once been Elise's favorite place in the city. It was narrow, brick-fronted, and full of light in the mornings. She had chosen the kitchen tiles herself. She had planted rosemary in the small courtyard. She had spent a winter painting the guest room a soft blue, while Adrian complained about the smell, and then praised the color to visitors, as if he had selected it. Now every room felt like a witness that had stayed silent too long. Elise moved through the house with a list. Passport, birth certificate, father's letters, trust copies, jewelry from her mother, laptop, a few clothes, the blue cashmere scarf Harrison gave her when she was 25, the framed photo of her parents in front of the old Valmont entrance. Adrian followed at a distance until the security escort asked him to remain in the kitchen. He did, but his voice carried. He spoke of marriage counseling. He spoke of stress. He spoke of how Celeste had pursued him during a vulnerable period. He said Elise had withdrawn after her father's illness and left him alone inside a marriage that felt like a museum. Elise placed folded sweaters into a suitcase and let him talk. She noticed something strange. His words no longer entered her in the same way. They still hurt, but they did not reorganize reality. She did not feel the old urge to defend her grief, explain her exhaustion, or prove that she had loved him enough. His version of events could stand in the kitchen without becoming hers. In the bedroom, she found the first hidden piece. It was not dramatic. A receipt had slipped behind the top drawer of Adrian's nightstand. Elise saw the white edge when she removed her reading glasses from the drawer below. She pulled it out. Valmont Hotel, presidential residence minibar, private dining, floral arrangement, 2 silk robes charged to Morganwell Hospitality Development. The date was 6 weeks earlier. Not Friday. 6 weeks earlier. Elise stood very still. The betrayal had not begun in the rain. The rain had only made it visible. She photographed the receipt and placed it in a document sleeve. Then she checked the drawer more carefully. Under a stack of cufflink boxes, she found a Valmont key card sleeve with Celeste's initials written in Adrian's hand. Inside was a folded note. Same time after the committee dinner. Use the east elevator. Elise sat on the edge of the bed. For a minute, she let herself feel the full insult. Not just the affair. Not just the hotel. The pattern. The way Adrian had used her family's property as his private stage while she sat beside her dying father, answering his texts with apologies for being unavailable. The room blurred. Then it cleared. She took photos, preserved the originals, and called Margaret. Adrian appeared in the doorway before Margaret answered. He saw the receipt in her hand. His face changed. Where did you find that? Elise looked at him. In your drawer. You are searching my private things now? The audacity was so complete she almost admired its architecture. You charged silk robes for your mistress to your company through my hotel, she said. Privacy is not your strongest argument. His eyes flicked toward the security escort, who had stepped into the hall. Adrian lowered his voice. Elise, listen. Those charges can be explained. Then explain them to the auditors. Do not do this. I am not doing it. I am documenting what you did. He moved one step into the room. The escort said his name once flatly. Adrian stopped. Elise zipped the suitcase. In the closet, she removed one final item. A navy dress she had worn to Morganwell's first investor dinner. That night, Adrian introduced her as the woman who believed in him before anyone else did. Later, in the cab home, he told her she had spoken too much to one of the investors and needed to learn when to let business breathe. She held the dress for a moment. Then she left it hanging. Not every memory needed to be rescued. As she walked downstairs, Adrian tried again. He offered to leave Celeste. He offered to issue a private apology. He offered to step back from the Valmont negotiations, but begged her not to damage Morganwell. He spoke faster as he realized none of it was working. At the front door, Elise paused. The company may survive if it is honest, she said. You may not remain in control of it. His expression emptied. There it was. The sentence that mattered to him. Not losing Elise. Losing control. He stepped closer, voice low. You were never interested in my work until you had power over it. Elise turned. I corrected your first investor deck at our kitchen table. I introduced you to 2 early advisors. I hosted the dinner where you met Nora Whitcomb. I listened to every rehearsal for 6 years. You called it support when it served you and ignorance when it challenged you. He looked away first. Do not mistake my silence for absence, she said. Then she walked out with one suitcase, one folder, and no desire to look back at the rosemary in the courtyard. Chapter 9. Celeste disappeared from the office for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she requested a meeting with Margaret Sloane. She did not request Elise, which was wise. But Margaret gave Elise the summary afterward and the summary changed the shape of the case. Celeste had not been merely a mistress. She had been part of the machinery. She provided messages showing Adrian instructed her to route certain hospitality expenses through brand development. She had helped prepare talking points implying the Valmont board had already aligned with Morgan well. She had drafted emails to investors that overstated the status of the expansion. She had arranged at least 3 hotel stays under corporate access, 2 at the Valmont and 1 at a sister property. She claimed Adrian told her Elise knew the marriage was effectively over. Elise believed he had said that. She did not believe Celeste had cared enough to confirm it. The messages also showed something else. Adrian had promised Celeste a new executive role after the Valmont deal closed. Chief Experience Officer. Expanded equity. Public visibility. He had described Elise as fragile, ornamental, and unlikely to understand the trust transition even if she inherited something from her father. That last phrase stayed with Elise. Even if she inherited something, Adrian had known there might be assets. He had simply assumed they would not matter because Elise controlled them. His contempt had made him careless. Margaret placed the message packet on Elise's desk in Harrison's office. Celeste is cooperating because she knows Adrian will blame her. Will he? He already has. Elise looked toward the window. The city was bright after days of rain. Below, guests moved in and out of the Valmont under the bronze canopy, unaware that the building had become the center of a private collapse. What happens to her? That depends. She has exposure. Misuse of company resources, investor communications, possibly misleading statements. Cooperation helps, but it does not erase responsibility. Good. Margaret studied her. You do not sound vindictive. I am tired. That is often safer. The Morganwell board called an emergency meeting the next morning. Elise did not attend. She did not need to. The board had the records, the investor concerns, and the Valmont suspension. Nora Whitcomb demanded independent counsel. 2 board members who had once praised Adrian's visionary leadership now spoke of fiduciary duty. The language of loyalty shifted quickly when liability entered the room. By evening, Adrian was placed on temporary leave pending review. He sent Elise one message from a new number. I hope you are happy. She stared at it for a long time. The answer was no. Happiness was not what arrived after betrayal. At least not immediately. What arrived first was clarity, and clarity was cold. It illuminated the damage without warming the room. Elise blocked the number. That night, she slept in a Valmont suite overlooking the river. Julian had sent tea and a simple dinner. Margaret had sent a list of decisions for the morning. The bed was enormous and unfamiliar. For the first time in years, no phone buzzed beside her with Adrian's late excuses. The silence felt too large. Then slowly it began to feel clean. At 2 a.m, Elise woke from a dream of the hotel lobby. In the dream, she kept watching Adrian enter with Celeste, but the doors never closed. They kept turning, glass panels reflecting the same moment again and again. She sat up, heart racing. The city lights shimmered beyond the window. Her father's ring lay on the bedside table. Her suitcase sat open on a chair, half unpacked because she had not yet decided how temporary this life was. She got out of bed and opened the curtains. The Valmont sign glowed above the avenue. For years, Elise had thought inheritance meant receiving things after loss. Buildings, accounts, documents, names on paper. Now she understood it also meant receiving unfinished obligations. Her father had left her control, but control was not comfort. It was a demand to choose. Would she use power only to punish Adrian? Would she hide the scandal to protect appearances? Would she become so afraid of looking emotional that she ignored the damage? Elise knew the answer to each question before dawn. No, she would not protect Adrian from consequences. She would not protect the hotel by pretending its privileges had not been abused. She would not let personal pain make her reckless with employees, investors, or guests who had done nothing wrong. She would be precise. That precision became her first real piece. Chapter 10. The review lasted 4 weeks. It was slower than gossip wanted and faster than Adrian expected. Investigators examined billing records, access logs, investor communications, expense approvals, and internal Morganwell messages. They interviewed Celeste twice. They interviewed Julian, 2 executive assistants, a finance manager, and several board members who suddenly remembered concerns they had not raised when Adrian was still powerful. The final report did not read like revenge. It read like a map of entitlement. Adrian had used negotiation privileges for personal hotel stays. He had allowed or directed expenses to be categorized as brand development. He had overstated Valmont's commitment to investors. He had failed to disclose his intimate relationship with the communications officer involved in partnership messaging. He had pressured staff to treat personal requests as strategic needs. He had not stolen millions. He had done something more common and, in some ways, more revealing. He had treated every boundary as negotiable because he believed he was valuable enough to cross it. The Morganwell board removed him as CEO 2 days after receiving the report. The announcement was brief. Adrian Morgan would transition out of leadership. An interim CEO would be appointed. Morganwell would strengthen governance and cooperate with Valmont's review. No one used the word fired. Everyone understood it. Celeste resigned the same day. Her statement praised the company's mission and expressed regret for errors in judgment. It did not mention Elise. That was wise too. Adrian did not go quietly, but he went. His attorney challenged parts of the report. He accused unnamed parties of weaponizing private matters. He hinted that Elise had acted out of personal animus. The claims found some attention online for a day, then faded when Nora Whitcomb publicly confirmed her firm supported the governance review. Money had many flaws. One useful quality was that it made certain people stop pretending not to hear facts. Elise remained focused on the hotel. Under her direction, Valmont created a stricter partner access policy. No executive suite use without named business purpose, written approval, and audit trail. No romantic partners or personal guests under corporate holds. No negotiation statements implying approval without controlling authority. Julian implemented the policy with visible satisfaction. At the next board meeting, Malcolm Reed called the changes heavy-handed. Elise asked him which part he preferred to leave vague. He did not have a good answer. Afterward, Priya Desai caught Elise near the library windows and said the staff had begun calling the policy the Morgan Rule. Elise did not smile. "Change the nickname," she said. Priya nodded. "I will." Elise did not want her future systems named after Adrian's misconduct. That was one of the quieter lessons of the past month. If she allowed every boundary to be defined by the person who violated it, he would remain central even in absence. The policy was renamed the Partner Integrity Protocol. Plain, useful, boring. Exactly right. Meanwhile, the marriage moved into legal terrain. Margaret referred Elise to a divorce attorney named Renata Cole, who spoke in short sentences and never confused sympathy with strategy. Renata reviewed financial records and advised immediate separation of accounts, preservation of communications, and a temporary agreement regarding the townhouse. Adrian's first settlement proposal arrived in a tone of injured dignity. He wanted privacy, mutual non-disparagement, and no further cooperation with investigators beyond what was legally required. He also wanted Elise to agree not to interfere with his future business opportunities. Renata read the proposal once and said, "He wants silence with a ribbon around it." Elise declined. The second proposal was more reasonable. Not generous. Reasonable. That was enough to continue. One evening in late April, Elise returned to the townhouse to inspect repairs before sale. Adrian was not there. The rooms had been staged by a realtor, stripped of personal clutter, made neutral for strangers. The blue guest room looked smaller without the books. The kitchen tiles still caught the afternoon light. In the courtyard, the rosemary had grown wild. Elise stood before it for a long time. She had thought leaving would feel like cutting out a part of herself. Instead, the house felt like a place where someone had asked her to whisper for too long. She cut a small stem of rosemary and placed it in her coat pocket. Not as a memory of Adrian. As proof that something she planted could survive after she left. Chapter 11. Adrian asked to meet her once before the divorce mediation. Renata advised against it unless counsel was nearby. Margaret advised against it entirely. Elise considered both opinions and chose a middle path. She agreed to meet in a conference room at Renata's office, with attorneys in the building and the door left partly open. Adrian arrived 10 minutes early. That alone told her he was afraid. He looked thinner. His suit was still tailored, but the old ease had gone. Without the title of CEO attached to him, his confidence seemed to need manual support. He stood when Elise entered, then seemed unsure whether the gesture would be received as respect or theater. Elise sat. He sat too. For a moment neither spoke. The silence was different from the silences in their marriage. Those had been full of things she was not allowed to name. This one belonged to her. Adrian began with regret. He said he had been arrogant, under pressure, and careless with boundaries. He said Celeste had become a place to escape his fear of failing. He said the hotel room had been inexcusable. He said using Elise's grief against her at the breakfast was the lowest moment of his life. The words were better than his earlier messages. That did not make them enough. Elise listened without interrupting. Then he asked whether she believed he had ever loved her. The question might have broken her months earlier. Now it sounded like a man reaching for a softer room. She told him that love without respect had become another form of hunger. Maybe he had loved her. Maybe he had loved being steadied by her. Maybe the difference had mattered less to him than it should have. Adrian looked down. His hands were clasped tightly on the table. He said he had lost everything. Elise felt the old reflex rise. Comfort him. Soften the sentence. Remind him he still had his health, his talent, his chance to rebuild. She had spent years filling silence with cushions for his pride. She let the reflex pass. He had not lost everything. He had lost the version of life where other people paid for his choices. When she said that, he closed his eyes. For the first time, he did not argue. That almost hurt more. He told her Celeste had left the city. He said he did not blame her for cooperating, though his voice made clear that part of him still did. He said Morganwell was moving on without him. He said investors no longer returned calls. Elise watched him speak and saw the outline of the man she had once loved. Not the whole man. Not enough to return to, but enough to mourn honestly. That was the cruel shape of memory. It did not erase tenderness just because betrayal deserved consequence. Adrian asked if there was any path back. Elise looked at him for a long time. There were years when she would have built that path herself. She would have found reasons, therapy plans, apologies, private rituals of repair. She would have taken the smallest sign of remorse and stretched it into shelter. Now she knew shelter built from someone else's panic did not hold. She told him no. Not with anger. Not with triumph. Just no. Adrian nodded slowly, as if the word had to travel through every room of his life before he could understand it. When the meeting ended, he stood but did not reach for her. That was the most respectful thing he had done in months. Elise left through the hallway where Renata waited. Outside, the afternoon was bright. Her phone was quiet. No apology could repair what had been revealed, but neither did the damage need to remain the center of every future day. She walked 3 blocks before calling Julian. There was a staff meeting at 4, and she wanted to attend. Work, she was learning, could be a clean place to put energy when grief had no new instructions. Chapter 12. Summer changed the Valmont slowly. Not the chandeliers or the marble or the bronze canopy. Those remained. The change happened in meeting rooms, staff trainings, access logs, vendor contracts, and the quiet confidence of people who realized the new controlling trustee actually read what they sent her. Elise learned the hotel from the inside out. She spent mornings with housekeeping supervisors, afternoons with finance, evenings reviewing guest experience reports. She walked service corridors in flat shoes. She listened to banquet captains explain how last-minute executive requests disrupted labor schedules. She asked security where policies sounded clear on paper, but failed at 2 in the morning. At first, some managers were careful around her. They expected grief. Or vanity. Or a wealthy daughter playing at responsibility. What they found was a woman who took notes, asked follow-up questions, and remembered answers. Julian became both guide and guardrail. He corrected her when she tried to solve too much too quickly. Margaret corrected her when she trusted a verbal assurance that needed a written trail. Priya Desai pushed the board to modernize oversight. Together, they made the Valmont less dependent on private understandings and more loyal to clear authority. Elise's father would have approved most of it. He might have complained about the software upgrade. The thought made her smile for the first time in days. The divorce settled in July. Adrian kept a smaller share of marital assets than he wanted and more dignity in the paperwork than he deserved. Elise kept the townhouse sale proceeds owed to her, her separate inheritance, her father's ring, and the legal right to stop being introduced as Mrs. Morgan when she did not want the name. She did not change her name immediately. People expected symbolism. A clean break. A restored maiden name. A public declaration. Elise refused to rush even that for the satisfaction of others. Vale belonged to her father. Morgan belonged to a marriage that had wounded her. Elise belonged to herself. She would decide the order when the decision felt like freedom instead of performance. In August, Valmont reopened the renovated rooftop garden. It was a project Harrison had approved before his illness worsened. The space had olive trees in wide planters, pale stone paths, and a view of the river at sunset. Elise held a small staff reception there before the public launch. No press. No investors. No speeches longer than 5 minutes. She thanked the teams who had carried the hotel through a difficult year. She thanked Julian for keeping standards steady. She thanked the people whose work guests noticed only when it failed, which meant most of them had been invisible because they were excellent. The staff applauded. Elise felt the sound differently than gala applause or investor attention. This was not about scandal. It was not about Adrian. It was not even about her inheritance. It was about work done well. After the reception, she remained on the rooftop as the sky darkened. Margaret stood beside her with a glass of sparkling water. "You look lighter," Margaret said. Elise considered that. "I feel less edited." Margaret smiled. "That is better than lighter." Below, the city moved in gold and blue. Somewhere inside it, Adrian was living with the consequences of his choices. Somewhere else, Celeste was beginning again, or repeating the same mistakes with different names. Elise did not need to know. For months, she had thought healing would arrive as a grand moment. A court date, a signed settlement, a public apology, a final humiliation for Adrian that balanced the first one. But healing had been quieter. It arrived when she stopped checking her phone before sleep. When she ordered dinner without considering Adrian's preferences. When she walked through the Valmont lobby and felt ownership without shock. When she heard the phrase "working late" and did not feel her stomach fall through the floor. The wound was still there. It no longer gave orders. Chapter 13. The first public story about Adrian appeared on a Tuesday morning. It was not fully accurate, but it was close enough to hurt everyone involved. A business blog reported that Morganwell's founder had been removed after an improper relationship created conflict concerns inside a major hotel partnership. The article did not name Elise at first, but the comments did. They found the Valmont. They found Celeste's old conference photos. They found Adrian's wedding announcement from years earlier and placed it beside a cropped image from a Morganwell launch party where Celeste stood too close to him. The internet did what it always did with someone else's pain. It made a meal of it. Elise read the article in her rooftop office while rain pressed against the windows. Her first reaction was not anger. It was fatigue. She had built the response carefully, document by document, refusing to turn the matter into spectacle. Now strangers were doing it for her with worse grammar and less mercy. Margaret called before Elise could call her. "Do not respond emotionally," she said. Elise looked at the comment section, where one person claimed she had trapped Adrian for money, and another called her a legend for humiliating him. Both versions felt like costumes. "I do not want to be a character in this," Elise said. "Then issue a statement that returns attention to process." By noon, Valmont released a short statement. It confirmed that the hotel group had completed a governance review related to partner access, strengthened internal protocols, and would not discuss private individuals beyond official business decisions. It did not mention affairs. It did not mention the presidential residence. It did not mention Elise watching her husband lie from across the street. That restraint frustrated gossip sites. It reassured serious partners. Inside the hotel, however, the story had already become personal. Staff had seen parts of the truth long before the public did. A front desk agent had checked in the corporate hold. A housekeeper had prepared the residence. A concierge had arranged the suit jacket. A security supervisor had preserved the elevator footage. Each had done their job, and each now worried the scandal might turn back on them. Elise called a staff meeting in the lower ballroom. She did not stand on a stage. She stood on the same floor as everyone else, with Julian beside her and Human Resources Counsel near the wall. More than 100 employees gathered in rows. Front desk, housekeeping, security, food service, events, maintenance, spa, finance, and night management. Some looked curious. Some looked tense. Some avoided her eyes. Elise understood why. Powerful people often demanded evidence, then punished the workers who preserved it. She would not allow that pattern here. "I know many of you have heard rumors," she began. "Some are true. Some are incomplete. Some are not worth repeating. What matters inside this hotel is simple. Employees who followed policy, preserved records, or reported concerns will not be punished for doing their jobs." Several shoulders loosened at once. Elise continued. "If any executive, partner, guest, board member, or manager asks you to hide a record, change a charge, ignore a policy, or treat private conduct as business use, you have the right to report it. You also have the right to protection afterward." Julian's expression remained formal, but Elise saw approval in his eyes. She explained the new reporting channel, the anonymous option, and the independent review path. She kept the sentences short. She did not make the staff responsible for her personal pain. She did not ask them to admire her. She asked them to trust the rule because the rule would apply even when the person breaking it had status. When she finished, a night auditor raised his hand. He was a thin man with tired eyes and a badge that read Marcus. He said some guests became aggressive when staff refused unofficial requests, especially if they believed they knew owners or executives. Elise asked him to describe the usual pattern. Marcus did. He spoke carefully at first, then more plainly. Guests used names. They threatened reviews. They claimed special relationships with board members. Sometimes staff gave in because refusing a loan at midnight felt dangerous. Elise listened without interrupting. By the end of the meeting, she had asked Julian to create a 24-hour escalation line for staff facing pressure from high-status guests. She also approved a policy that no employee would be disciplined for delaying a questionable request until a supervisor reviewed it. The staff applause afterward was not loud. It was better than loud. It was relieved. That evening, Elise walked the service corridor with Marcus and the night manager. The corridor was plain, with gray walls, practical lighting, and carts parked neatly near the freight elevator. It was not the glamorous Valmont guests photographed. It was the hotel that made the glamorous one possible. Marcus showed her where the old camera angle missed part of the east elevator hall. The night manager explained how executive privacy requests sometimes bypassed regular shift notes. Elise took notes and approved a camera adjustment before dinner. On the way back upstairs, Julian said her father had once spent 3 nights learning the laundry system after a linen vendor overcharged the hotel. Elise smiled faintly. Did he fix it? He fired the vendor and promoted the laundry supervisor. That sounded like Harrison. The public story continued for another week. Some strangers praised Elise, as if revenge were the whole point. Others accused her of destroying a man over an affair. Adrian's supporters repeated that private pain had been weaponized. Celeste's old posts vanished. Morganwell's new leadership stayed silent and kept working. Elise did the same. She learned that public opinion was a room with no exits and too many mirrors. If she entered it looking for justice, she would lose hours of her life to people who did not know the cost of the facts they were arranging for entertainment. So she stopped reading. Instead, she reviewed staff protections, finalized the partner policy, and approved a quiet bonus for the teams pulled into the review. Not a public reward, not hush money, a recognition that integrity often added labor before it added praise. At the end of the week, Marcus sent Julian a note saying the night shift felt safer. Julian forwarded it to Elise without comment. She printed it and placed it in her father's blue folder. It was not dramatic. It mattered. Chapter 14. The most difficult invitation came from the hospital foundation. 3 months after the scandal, the foundation asked Elise to speak at a small donor luncheon about ethical partnerships in hospitality and wellness. It was not a glamorous event, but the guest list mattered. Healthcare administrators, hotel owners, compliance officers, and investors who had watched the Morganwell situation from a careful distance. Elise's first instinct was to decline. She did not want to become the woman people invited when they wanted a polished betrayal story with governance lessons attached. She did not want strangers looking at her and imagining the hotel lobby, the red coat, the key card, the presidential residence. She had no interest in turning pain into a brand. Margaret agreed with most of that. Then she asked one question. Can the speech help prevent another organization from making the same mistake? Elise hated how often Margaret's questions were useful. She accepted on strict terms. No personal details. No panel title about scandal or reinvention. No promotional language about a wronged wife. The topic would be partner access, documentation, and protecting staff from executive pressure. The luncheon took place in a private dining room at a different hotel. Elise appreciated that. The room was quiet, with pale walls and a view of winter trees. No bronze canopy. No east elevator. No ghosts she had to step around. Before the speech, an older donor approached her and said she had been very brave. Elise thanked her, though the word brave still felt strange. Much of what she had done had not felt brave. It had felt necessary. It had felt sickening. It had felt like walking carefully while holding a bowl filled to the rim. When Elise stood to speak, she placed 1 page of notes on the lectern. She did not tell the story the room expected. She spoke about access. Access to rooms. Access to accounts. Access to staff time. Access to institutional reputation. Access to the credibility of a trusted brand. She explained that misconduct often entered through small permissions. A suite booked without a clear purpose. A charge coded vaguely. A staff member told not to ask questions. A guest treated as too important for normal procedure. A meeting described as aligned before approval exists. None of those details sounded dramatic by themselves. Together, they could become a system that protected the wrong person. Elise kept her voice steady and her sentences clean. She said organizations failed when they relied on personal trust where written authority belonged. She said staff needed safe ways to pause requests from powerful people. She said privacy was important, but privacy without accountability became a luxury for misconduct. The room listened more closely than she expected. During questions, one hospital administrator asked how to balance discretion for high-profile donors with internal controls. Elise answered from the place the last year had built in her. Discretion should protect legitimate privacy, not erase responsibility. If a process cannot survive being written down, the process is probably protecting the wrong interest. Several people took notes. Another guest asked whether personal betrayal had made her too strict. The room tightened. Margaret, seated near the wall, lifted her chin slightly. Elise did not rush. She looked at the guest, a man with a pleasant face and careless confidence, and answered without heat. Personal betrayal made her notice the issue. The records proved it mattered. Good governance did not depend on whether her feelings were convenient. The man looked down at his plate. Afterward, a young operations director waited until the others left. She said her company had a senior executive who often used partner spaces for unclear private meetings. She had been afraid to report it because everyone liked him and she did not have proof of anything criminal. Elise felt the old coldness move through her, not fear this time, but recognition. She told the woman to document policy gaps, not rumors. Preserve dates, requests, approvals, and billing paths. Ask for process clarification in writing. Find counsel if retaliation seemed possible. Do not carry the whole institution alone. The woman nodded with wet eyes. In the car afterward, Elise sat beside Margaret and looked out at the winter streets. "That is why you told me to accept," she said. Margaret's mouth curved slightly. "I only asked a question. A pointed one. Useful questions often are." Elise leaned back against the seat. Something had shifted during the luncheon. Not healed completely. Not transformed into gratitude. She would never be grateful for Adrian's betrayal. But she could now see one way the pain had been converted into protection for people beyond herself. That mattered. At the Valmont, Julian met her with a maintenance report and a complaint from Malcolm Reed about budget oversight. Life, mercifully, had not become symbolic all the time. There were still pipes, costs, schedules, and board members who disliked being asked for evidence. Elise took the folder and went upstairs. In the rooftop office, she placed her speech notes beside the blue folder. Then she wrote one sentence on a clean page. Never let spectacle replace structure. She taped it inside her desk drawer. Not for guests. Not for investors. For herself. Chapter 15. The anniversary of Harrison's death came on a clear morning. Elise spent it at the Valmont because that felt more honest than staying home with flowers and memory. She visited the old executive archive where her father kept hotel maps, early contracts, and handwritten notes about renovations. Julian brought the blue folder Harrison had mentioned in the note. Inside were plans for parts of the hotel Elise had never seen. There were service tunnels from the original building, a closed tea room behind the East Ballroom, and a small rooftop office that had once belonged to the founder's daughter. On the final page, Harrison had written, "For Elise, if she ever wants a room no one assigned to her." The sentence struck deeper than she expected. A room no one assigned to her. So much of her married life had been spent accepting assigned spaces. The seat beside Adrian when he wanted a stable image. The table away from negotiations when he wanted freedom. The role of grieving daughter when he needed her competence dismissed. The role of emotional wife when he needed facts softened. Her father, in his guarded way, had left her a different instruction. Find a room of your own. By September, the old rooftop office had been restored. Not lavishly. Elise did not want a throne. She wanted a working room with a desk, shelves, a long table for documents, and windows that opened toward the river. She hung one photograph inside. Harrison standing in the unfinished lobby in 1987, sleeves rolled up, looking annoyed at whoever held the camera. The first document she signed there was the final approval for the Partner Integrity Protocol across all Valmont properties. The second was a scholarship fund for hotel employees pursuing business, hospitality, or accounting degrees. The third was a letter declining any renewed partnership conversation with Morgan Well until the company completed a full year under independent leadership. The work was not glamorous. It was hers. One afternoon, Nora Whitcomb visited to discuss a separate wellness vendor. She paused at the office window and said she had underestimated Elise at the breakfast. Elise did not rush to make her comfortable. Nora respected that. Adrian sold confidence well, Nora said. Yes. You sell something better. Elise looked at her. What is that? Proof. The word stayed with Elise long after Nora left. Proof had become the spine of her new life. Proof in records. Proof in actions. Proof that calm was not weakness. Proof that betrayal could be answered without becoming careless. Proof that a woman could be hurt and still govern well. In October, Elise hosted the first advisory dinner she designed herself. Not Adrian's investors. Not his board. Hers. The guest list included hotel operators, healthcare compliance experts, labor representatives, privacy counsel, and 2 technology founders with reputations for clean governance. The dinner was held in the restored tea room, not the grand ballroom. No one sat at a more important table because all tables had been arranged in a square. Elise opened with a simple statement. Valmont would pursue innovation, but not at the cost of integrity. The conversation that followed was dense, practical, and useful. No one performed brilliance for cameras. No one called exploitation synergy. No one treated discretion as permission to hide misconduct. After dessert, Julian told Elise the staff liked this group better than the old Morganwell crowd. Elise asked why. He said they looked people in the eye when asking for coffee. That answer mattered more than several investment memos. Late that night, after the guests left, Elise walked alone through the lobby. The chandelier light reflected on the marble. The revolving doors turned slowly as a couple entered from the avenue. The front desk team greeted them by name. Elise stopped near the place where, months earlier, Adrian and Celeste had crossed the lobby toward the private elevator. The memory rose. It no longer swallowed the room. She could see it now as one event in a larger life, not the center of the story. A painful door, not the house. She touched her father's ring and kept walking. Chapter 16. Adrian's apology arrived in November. It came as a handwritten letter delivered through counsel, which meant Renata read it first. She called Elise and said it was not legally dangerous, only emotionally inconvenient. Elise almost declined to read it. Then she decided fear should not choose for her. The letter was 6 pages long. Adrian wrote that he had entered treatment for anxiety and compulsive approval-seeking. He wrote that losing Morgan Well had forced him to see how much of his identity depended on being admired. He wrote that Celeste had not ruined their marriage. He had. He wrote that using Harrison's hotel was an act of arrogance he would never be able to excuse. For once, he did not ask for anything. No meeting. No reconsideration. No request for silence. No hint that her inheritance had changed her. At the end, he wrote, I used to think your quietness meant you would always make room for me. Now I understand that you were making room for both of us, and I kept filling it with myself. Elise read the sentence twice. Then she placed the letter on her desk and looked out over the river. It would have been easier if the apology were bad. Easier to dismiss, easier to hate, easier to file away with the other documents. A better apology did not change the outcome, but it complicated the grief. That was fair. Life after betrayal did not owe her simple feelings. She wrote a reply 3 days later. It was short. She acknowledged receipt. She hoped he continued doing the work. She made clear that their marriage was over and would remain over. She wished him accountability before success. Renata approved the wording. Margaret called it generous but not foolish. Elise called it finished. In December, the Valmont held its winter staff celebration in the grand ballroom. Elise almost canceled the formal program, afraid the room would remind her too much of old performances. Julian persuaded her not to let bad memories own useful spaces. He was right. The ballroom looked different, filled with employees and their families. Children ran carefully between tables until parents pulled them back. Chefs who usually worked behind doors stood near the dessert station in clean jackets. Housekeepers wore evening clothes and laughed with security staff. The pianist played holiday standards without trying to impress anyone. Elise gave a brief toast. She did not mention Adrian. She did not mention scandal. She spoke about trust as a daily practice, not a slogan. She thanked teams who protected guests they would never meet again. She announced the first recipients of the Employee Scholarship Fund. When one young front desk agent began to cry after hearing her name, The room applauded with such warmth that Elise had to look down for a moment. Later, Julian brought her a small plate of lemon pastries. Elise stared at them. For a second, she was back under the florist awning, holding a rain-soft paper bag while Adrian lied from across the street. Julian realized too late. "I am sorry. I did not think." Elise picked up one pastry. "No," she said. "It is all right." She took a bite. The lemon was bright, sharp, and sweet. The memory did not vanish. It changed shape. That, she realized, was another kind of victory. Not erasing the night, not pretending the hotel had never hurt her, but taking back even the smallest things from the scene of betrayal and letting them belong to life again. Chapter 17. A year after the rainy Friday, Elise stood beneath the bronze canopy of the Valmont Hotel and watched the evening lights come on. She had not planned the timing. The board meeting ran late, a vendor call took longer than expected, and by the time she stepped outside, the avenue had the same wet shine she remembered from that night. Rain misted through the air. Cars moved slowly along the curb. Guests hurried under umbrellas toward the revolving doors. Her phone buzzed. For one strange second, her body remembered before her mind did. The old reflex tightened her stomach. Working late. Do not wait up. A lie delivered in a rectangle of light. She looked down. It was a message from Priya Desai. Board packet approved. Clean vote. Go home before Julian starts guarding the elevator. Elise smiled. The body learned fear quickly. It learned safety more slowly. She no longer resented that. Healing was not proof that nothing hurt. Healing was the ability to feel an old echo and still remain in the present. She put the phone away. Through the lobby glass, she saw the hotel moving as it should. The front desk team handled arrivals. A concierge bent to help an older guest with a suitcase. In the lounge, two executives argued politely over a contract while a server refilled water without interrupting. No one inside knew the exact place where Elise had stood a year earlier with pastries in her hand and a marriage collapsing in real time. That was all right. Not every wound needed a plaque. Elise stepped into the lobby. Julian met her near the flowers with a folder in hand. The final Morganwell report arrived, he said. She had expected tension. Instead, she felt only curiosity. Morganwell had stabilized under new leadership. The company had repaid disputed expenses, corrected investor statements, and implemented independent oversight. It had not regained Valmont's partnership. Another vendor had earned that opportunity through a cleaner process. Adrian had no role in either company. Elise read the summary and handed it back. "File it." Julian nodded. "Anything else?" She looked around the lobby. There was always something else. A hotel was a living argument against finality. Rooms turned over. Guests arrived. Pipes failed. Staff changed. Contracts needed review. Flowers wilted and were replaced. Work continued. That used to exhaust her. Now it comforted her. "No," she said. "That is enough for tonight." She walked toward the private elevator, then stopped. The East Tower elevator stood at the end of the corridor, polished and quiet. The same elevator Adrian and Celeste had used. For months, Elise had avoided it without admitting she was avoiding it. She took other routes, used service stairs, pretended convenience was the reason. Tonight, she pressed the button. The doors opened. The elevator was empty. Elise stepped inside. As it rose, she watched her reflection in the brass doors. She looked calm, but not because nothing had happened. She looked calm because the woman in the reflection had stopped asking betrayal to explain her worth. At the rooftop office, she opened the windows to the rain-cooled air. The city smelled clean. On her desk lay hotel reports, scholarship applications, and a small vase of rosemary from the old townhouse courtyard. It had rooted in water weeks ago. Soon she would plant it in a real pot. She sat and took off her father's ring, turning it once in her palm. For a long time, she had believed the night at the hotel was the moment she lost her marriage. Later, she thought it was the moment she gained power. Now she understood it more simply. It was the moment she stopped mistaking access for love. Adrian had access to her patience, her labor, her family rooms, her sympathy, her silence. He treated access as ownership. When she finally closed the door, he called it cruelty because he had forgotten the door was hers. That was the lesson she kept. Love without respect was not intimacy. It was occupation. Trust without honesty was not loyalty. It was unpaid labor. Silence without choice was not peace. It was disappearance. Elise did not disappear. She signed the last document of the evening with her full name. Elise Vale Morgan. One day she might change it. One day she might not. The power was in the choosing. Outside, rain moved softly over the city. Inside, the hotel continued breathing around her, not as a monument to what had happened, but as proof of what could be governed after pain. The husband who texted working late had believed he was stepping into a secret room. He had actually stepped into the truth. And Elise, who had arrived with pastries and a breaking heart, walked out of that truth with her name, her evidence, her boundaries, and a life no longer built around waiting for a man to come home. In the months that followed, she stopped measuring progress by whether Adrian still crossed her mind. Some days he did. A familiar cologne in an elevator, a phrase from an investor, or the glow of a late-night message could still pull a thread from the past. But the thread no longer dragged her backward. She could notice the memory, name it, and keep walking. That became her private definition of freedom. Not forgetting. Not pretending she had never been fooled. Not turning herself into a woman too hard to be hurt again. Freedom was the ability to trust her own perception before someone else's explanation. It was the right to pause when a story felt wrong. It was the right to ask for records, to leave a room, to end a call, to choose silence because she wanted peace rather than because she feared punishment. The Valmont changed with her in small, visible ways. Staff began using the escalation line without apology. Board packets became clearer. Partner agreements became shorter and stricter. The rooftop office became a working room instead of a symbol. Elise held meetings there with windows open when weather allowed, and people learned that if they brought vague language, she would ask what it meant in practice. She was not always graceful. Sometimes she was impatient. Sometimes a harmless delay felt like the beginning of an old pattern. Sometimes she reread a document 3 times because trust had become something she rebuilt with evidence. But she no longer apologized for needing clarity. The people worth keeping adjusted. The people who preferred fog found easier rooms elsewhere. One evening, Julian found her in the lobby after a long event, watching a young couple check in for their anniversary. The husband carried the luggage. The wife held the reservation printout and corrected the spelling of their name with a shy smile. Nothing about them belonged to Elise, yet the ordinariness touched her. For a moment, she wondered whether love would ever feel simple again. Then she let the question pass without forcing an answer. Her life did not need to be solved before it could be lived. She had the hotel, the work, her father's unfinished maps, the rosemary now growing in a clay pot near her office window, and a self she was still learning without Adrian's shadow over every choice. That was enough.